Hello, everybody, and welcome back to lecture 2 for this week. In this lecture, we're going to be talking more about the neuroanatomy of motivated behavior. And as just a little refresher, we talked about this in the last lecture, but motivation is the internal state that acts to initiate or energize behavior. Now, one of the key neuroanatomical areas associated with this is going to be the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a crucial neural structure in producing motivated behavior as it receives projections from all of the major nervous system subdivisions. And the hypothalamus, it integrates diverse adaptive behavior through the behavioral control column. The hypothalamus also acts to organize cerebral inputs and to produce feedback loops that regulate cerebral or information to orchestrate homeostasis and motivated behaviors. Now, the figure that we have over on the right here, this is showing some of the funneling of signals that is believed to take place. So in this proposed model, there are the many inputs from the cerebral hemispheres that then funnel through the hypothalamus, which in turn sends its axons to control brainstem circuits that produce motivated behaviors. So let's get into regulatory and non-regulatory behavior. Regulatory behaviors are motivated to meet the survival needs of the animal or the organism. They're controlled by homeostatic mechanisms that include the hypothalamus. Some examples of this are going to be the internal body temperature, where there is this set point that we're not wanting to deviate from very much. Otherwise, we could end up with something like heat stroke or hypothermia or whatnot. We're wanting to stay in this pretty consistent range for our body temperature. We also want to maintain a certain amount of water in our body. Again, we don't want to have too much. We don't want to have too little. Either way could be pretty bad for us. Similarly, we want to have a balance of dietary nutrients and salt consumption. We want to have these consistent blood sugar levels and, of course, waste elimination. Now, in contrast, there are the non-regulatory behaviors. These are not required to meet the basic survival needs of an animal. They're not controlled by homeostatic mechanisms. This really includes everything beyond those basic survival needs that I had talked about in the last slide. So these mostly involve a variety of forebrain structures, especially the frontal lobes. Some examples of the non-regulatory behaviors are sexual behaviors, parental behaviors, aggressive acts, food preferences, just a general curiosity, wanting to read, things like that. So in all of those cases, with or without these behaviors, an organism is still able to live and survive. Whereas in the regulatory behaviors, those behaviors are really needing to be controlled, because if they're not controlling these systems in the body, the organism will no longer be able to survive. So let's get into some of the activities of the hypothalamic circuit. As I said before, the hypothalamus, it maintains homeostasis by acting on both the endocrine and autonomic nervous systems. The hypothalamus influences behaviors selected by the limbic system. It controls the pituitary gland, which is attached to this brain structure by a stalk. And it influences a wide variety of motivated behaviors, ranging from an individual's heart rate to feeding behaviors to sexual activity. And just a lot of other biological rhythms as well. Now, this figure here, it's 12.5 in your textbook. I think this is a helpful image as it shows in figure A up above, medial view showing the relationship between the hypothalamic nuclei and the rest of the brain. In image B just below, this is more of a frontal view. It shows the relative position of the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and in the midline between the left and right hemispheres, the third ventricle. Note the three principal hypothalamic regions: the periventricular, the lateral, and the medial. And now we'll go a little bit more into the actual anatomy of the hypothalamus. So there are going to be the three regions of the hypothalamus that take place. There's going to be the lateral region, the medial region, and the paraventricular region. There's also the medial forebrain bundle, or the MFB, which is the principal tract in the hypothalamus. So the activating projections that run from the brainstem to the basal ganglia and the frontal cortex are major components of the MFB, the primary pathway for fibers connecting various parts of the limbic system with the brainstem. Now, the lateral hypothalamus, that's composed of both nuclei and nerve tracts that are running up and down the brain. It connects the lower brainstem to the forebrain. Next, there is the medial forebrain bundle that connects the structures of the brainstem with various parts of the limbic system. It forms the activating projections from the brainstem to the basal ganglia and the frontal cortex. There's also the dopamine-containing fibers that are involved in reward and therefore contribute to many motivated behaviors. The hypothalamic involvement of the hormone secretions. So there's the production of various neuropeptides, which suggests a special relationship between the hypothalamus and the pituitary. In the posterior pituitary, there's this neurotissue, the continuation of the hypothalamus. The anterior pituitary is this glandular tissue. It synthesizes various hormones. And then there's the releasing hormones. These are peptides that are released by the hypothalamus to increase or decrease the release of hormones from the anterior pituitary. So it's regulating some of the hormone release that's taking place there. Now, the hypothalamus, it makes peptides such as oxytocin that is transported down axons to terminals in the posterior pituitary. The capillaries in the posterior pituitary's vascular bed then pick up these peptides, the peptides that enter the bloodstream, which then carries them to distant targets. So an example of this is oxytocin not only controls milk ejection in females, but it also performs a more general role in several forms of affiliative behavior. In this figure here, this is showing the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So the anterior pituitary is connected to the hypothalamus by a system of blood vessels that carry hormones from the hypothalamus to the pituitary. The posterior pituitary receives input from axons to the hypothalamic neurons, and both regions respond to hypothalamic input by producing hormones that travel in the bloodstream to stimulate target organs. The pituitary consists of distinct anterior and posterior glands that are shown over here in this image. The posterior pituitary is composed of neural tissue that is essentially a continuation of the hypothalamus. Now here we have listed a number of the major hormones that are produced by the anterior pituitary. I'm not going to read these fully just because I don't know if I could pronounce this correctly. But essentially the ACTH that controls the secretion of the adrenal cortex, the thyroid stimulating hormone or TSH controls the secretion of the thyroid gland. The follicle stimulating hormone or the FSH controls the secretion of the gonads. The luteinizing hormone or LH controls also the secretion of the gonads. Prolactin that controls the secretion of the mammillary glands, and growth hormone that produces growth or promotes growth throughout the body. And if I were to guess, I would say that's pronounced adrenocorticotropic. All right, now the hypothalamic involvement in hormone secretions. As we're moving along there, the factors that are involved in controlling the hypothalamic hormone-related activity, there are these feedback loops in which the hormones influence the hypothalamus to decrease the secretion of releasing hormones. It's really controlling the amount of hormone that's released. There's also the neural regulation or neural controls in these other brain regions, such as the limbic system and frontal lobes, that influence hormone release. And the excitatory and inhibitory influences exert by cognitive activity can then influence neurons in the periventricular region. And the experiential responses, these can alter the structure and function of hypothalamic neurons. In figure 12.8 that's seen here, we can see in figure A, the release of hormones from the hypothalamus stimulate the anterior pituitary to release some of these hormones. The pituitary hormones then stimulate target organs, such as the thyroid and adrenal glands, to release their hormones. Then there's this feedback loop where those hormones influence the hypothalamus to decrease its secretions of the releasing hormone. And in figure B, we can see that in the milk letdown response, oxytocin released from the hypothalamus stimulates the mammary glands to release milk. The milk letdown is enhanced by infant-related stimuli and are inhibited by maternal anxiety, which we can see here. Now, the hypothalamic involvement in generating behavior. The hypothalamus controls hormone systems that play a central role in generating behavior. The electrical stimulation of the different nuclei in the hypothalamus produces goal-directed behaviors in animal studies, such as eating and drinking, digging, displaying fear, predatory or attack behavior, and reproductive behavior. Now, that is the end of the second lecture. See you soon for part 3.